Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm excellent. I'm excellent. I'm always injured.
Right?
It's
Yeah.
just a feature of my life. But beyond that,
Not a
I'm
bug. It's a
it's not a
feature.
bug. It's a feature. Yeah, well, right, no, because here's why, because it slows me down, right? Like some people can just regulate they can just sort of regulate more spiritually, right? Um I can't regulate spiritually. I'm always in overdrive spiritually, and so my body regulates for me.
Yeah, got it.
I mean,
I mean,
you know, something has to stop me.
something will give eventually.
Exactly, exactly. But otherwise, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I am not injured. I am sore, but that's
And
all to the
why?
best.
And why are you sore, Jesse?
Because I was climbing some big stuff this past weekend,
I
and pushing
I
myself, and it was good.
I saw the picture, and it's always like I have no frame of reference. Like my frame of reference is I'm a human, and like those things are high. That's my frame. That's my frame of reference, and
Yeah.
so it's always so intimidating. But I don't really understand what about it is intimidating, except that it's just like, nah, fuck that shit. Um,
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. Yeah, I mean, for since the picture isn't on a screen, like I started a route that's a 10B, and I have to lead climb it. So, there's no rope coming from the top to save me. I have to consciously save myself. But this route goes up across the roof. So you go up 40 feet, and then you're go across
mm,
maybe 15 feet, probably. Maybe it's more like 20 feet, but upside down across
mm,
the ceiling.
mhm. Right,
Uh,
which you can't really honestly, it's hard to like you told that to me, and so I was able to like try and do the math in my head in terms of the depth perception. But it's hard to communicate that over a still photo, right? So, um,
yeah.
but I mean, I was able to see, and it's super impressive, and it left me to wonder, like, how on earth do you manage that safely? Like, how do you manage safety protocols in that environment? Is there uh, where are the belays and those types of things?
Oh yeah. Okay. So like there are clips. Maybe I'll circle them in the picture, or you could like zoom in on the picture and you'll see them. But there are clips on the way up, like
Mm,
every body length or so, maybe
oh,
more, maybe less,
right.
right? And so um, I have a rope going from me to my partner, and then as I go up, I clip in, and then I go up and I clip in, and I go up and I clip in.
Right, and this is we were talking about this when you had first started
Yeah,
integrating this practice into your life, which was this. There was this moment, or there was always like half of the climb is always the upswing in terms of danger,
yeah.
right? So it's like a pendulum in terms of danger, right? Like so.
Well, of perceived danger, because
Sure,
our
yeah, yeah,
our perception of danger in is wrong. Like
right,
to
sure,
be clear.
exactly, 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 right. But in any case, there's you go, um, you clip in and you're below the the clip, and then you slowly climb, and then you get past it eventually, and then that's the part where the fall is going to be the greatest height, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
then but then like eventually you get, so it's like worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until you're within reach of the next one, and then you
Yeah.
clip in, and then it's better, 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 and then you go up again, and it's sort of you follow that pattern.
Yes.
Is that sort of the way that you experience it emotionally, in terms of,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Right. And so this is what I mean by perceived danger. Again, any experienced climber listening, I'm new and I don't know what I'm talking about. But this is what I've what I've learned. This is the limits of my learning so far, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so, like, yes, you clip and then you're like, oh, okay, I'm fine, right? And so then you're going to go to the next one. So because you get that release, which maybe ties back to when we were talking about horses, right? Of you train them, like when you release, when you release the pressure, they get relief and endorphins and feel good, right?
Oh man, we talked about it before, but I don't think I had a real gestalt about it until this moment.
Yeah, right? It's exactly like that. So when I clip, I'm like, oh, everything's fine. And then you breathe and then you keep going. And so the urge becomes, can I just barely reach that clip? Then I should clip, because you want the release so bad.
Mm.
But that means you have to remember you're above the previous clip.
Mm-hmm.
So the more rope you pull out,
right, the more you're lengthening the amount of fall that you're going to have to contend with.
If you happen to fall at exactly that moment, which of course you're likely to, because you have removed one hand and you're doing this complex task,
right?
And you're having to like think about which way you put the rope in the clip. Like there are all these little.
Well, you've like, so everything is way more complex in that moment, right?
Yes.
Like so you're exponentially increasing the complexity of the activity in that window of time, right?
Because in that window,
you're removing grips that you otherwise would have had.
Yep.
To perform a complex task that doesn't involve like searching for the next grip, right? Like so the movement pattern and the skills pattern is one thing until you get to this moment. Then you have to do this other complex thing.
Yes. Right. So and yeah, because you've removed a thing and you're doing a complex task, then of course it heightens your likelihood to fall in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So internally, you're like, the sooner I can clip, the safer I am. But that is inaccurate, because if you've had to pull out so much rope, like imagine if I'm reaching up to here, like to my height, and my rope is at my waist. So now I've pulled 3, 4, 5, 6 feet, right? Mm-hmm. So my fall is going to be a 12-foot fall. Mm-hmm. Which is not insignificant. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's fine. Like I'm not going to die.
Sure. Have you fallen 12 feet?
No.
Have you fallen 3 feet?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yes. So we've narrowed the
right. And so yeah, so there's all of these little things. So I can climb an 11B, right? So it's like 10 A, B, C, D, 11 A, B, C, D, 12 A, B, C, right? And each grade, like even though it sounds like a subgrade, is a full grade, right? So each letter is a step that is real. So I can climb 4 steps higher if I'm top roped than if I'm doing this thing.
And it's purely psychological, like it's purely the way that you're right.
It's basically psychological, right? I mean, there, like we talked about, there is more complex real action that you have to think about and worry about. So that is real. So there is a little bit of physicality that is different, but I would say, I mean, to my experience so far, 90% of it's in my fucking head.
Yeah. Right.
But everyone agrees that it's harder to lead than to top rope. Mm-hmm. So I'm not the only one with an experience, similar to that. So, but yeah, so falling. So did we talk about on the podcast, or did I just talk to you that like I had a fall that was kind of bad?
I don't know that. I don't remember. I know that you shared. You know what? I'm not even sure that you shared that with me.
Oh, well, I mean,
podcast or I don't.
Maybe. Well, sorry if you all heard this before. You're hearing it again because somehow I told you without James. But that doesn't make sense. But here we are. Yeah. So I was lead climbing, and I had a fall where I was upside down, and I had my foot hooked in such a way that when I fell, I went upside down. And so when I swung upside down, it's my head arcing for the wall. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I do remember
Because,
that. And
yeah.
I don't think I'm not sure that we talked about it on the podcast.
Right. Okay. So in the moment it happened, my belayer was really good and really experienced. So like he hauled on the rope and threw his arm out and like palmed my face so my face didn't hit the wall and spun me. Yes. Right. And so it wasn't bad in the sense that I literally didn't get hurt at all. Mm-hmm. And so this funny thing happened, which I've reframed. So this is the new part, even if I talked about that fall, is I was not scared, right? Like I slipped off, I went around, I sighted the wall. I saw it was, you know how you do when you're falling, when you get thrown, like a big throw, right? I sighted the wall. I saw it was coming. I saw my belayer partner's hand come up and like clip me. And I was like, that was nuts. But then he was like, oh, holy shit. And like the employees came running. Oh, right. Holy shit. Are you okay? Right.
Yeah. And you, even in that moment, because you hadn't been primed or you didn't really understand it that way, you didn't experience it that way. So like for you, it was just like, okay, this is like what falling is. And then like afterwards you realize like, no, this was actually traumatic.
Right. But like okay. So you remember having toddlers, and I don't know if like anybody gave you this advice, but it was given to me that like, if your toddler is hauling ass down the concrete and trip and fall and do this ugly ass wipeout, right? And kind of roll, but they pop up, that no matter how terrified you are, you have to keep your shit together and do not let them know you got scared.
Right. For sure. And honestly, even if they don't pop up, like it's probably for the best to just keep your shit together. But like let's say like you find out that they broke their arm. Maybe the best way to handle that is be like, oh, okay, let's take care of this. Let's put this in a makeshift splint and we'll call the doctor and everything's going to be fine. Right. Like that's what you want to do.
Absolutely. And then you lose your shit later when they're not in the room.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So.
And let's talk about why that's important real quick. Okay. Just frame it in the terms that we've been using in the pod. Right. So like what we're trying to show them is it's not like experiencing the chaos of the universe, right? Like experiencing phenomena that you don't understand or can't control, and that is going to behave in ways that might even be disruptive to your life, right? That's a good thing that we should embrace and that we should endeavor to learn from and be okay, teach ourselves that it's okay to be in those headspaces, right? And that's why, so go ahead. Sorry.
And to reference Rachel, her Instagram handle is Zocdoc. Anyways, I'll find it. I'll put it in she has a very strange Z last name. And so, but she's a doctor of pain. And so she says all pain is biological, psychological, and social, right? And so what we are doing when we do this for our children is not bringing social pain to them. Mm-hmm. We are not saying you should be afraid, you are hurt, this is pain, right? We're not heightening their experience. If they had pain, we're not making it bigger. Mm-hmm. That's why we have to control ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. So in this fall, I was the toddler. I had no conception to be scared, to be worried. I actually wasn't hurt. Everything played out wonderfully. And yet, all of the trustworthy adults in the room who had experience lost their shit.
Right. Right.
So what happened is the next time I went to climb, I was fucking terrified.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I had a week of thinking about all those people coming running.
Good.
Yeah.
Good job, team.
Yeah. Right. I mean, nobody was trying to do that to me.
No, of course. Right. I mean, and it's so funny because this is, like we've intellectualized this quite a bit, right? And I feel like we kind of have a fairly deep understanding of what this type of thing is. But that being said, like these concepts are not like unheard of, right? Like this is the stuff that every culture at every level of sort of sophistication, we might say, right, has a sense of what this is. Like, so for instance, if I bet you, there's like sort of 150 words that every language has, like because
Right.
language develops in our prehistory and etc. So like there's always mom and dad, right? There's always those languages. There's always like river, right, or something, and there's always tree. And
Hill.
I bet,
Yeah.
the kind of, right, and I bet you that there's always some word for like chill, right? Like chill the fuck out,
Right.
right? There has to be, right? Because this is something that we know so intuitively as a part of our humanity, that you just need to relax in these situations. And yet it's something that we're always contending with. And I'm sure that there's lots of evolutionary science that talks about the utility or the value in this type of behavior. But
oh, I mean, it makes total sense that, like, why should I have to encounter a tiger for you to be like, hey, be scared of a tiger? Okay, cool.
Right.
Right. So I came back, and for the past, I guess I think it's been four climbing sessions since that fall that I've been contending with what I didn't have previously, which was being concerned about falling. I was in no way concerned about it whatsoever.
I remember you sharing that, like as you were starting on this journey. It was like, yeah, I keep on being told, or like it's become clear to me that I am just not afraid in a way that's normal, right? But then I don't think that you've mentioned after that, like you mentioned the experience or whatever, and you told me how everyone freaked out. But I don't think that you shared that, like you've started to take in some of that fear.
Yeah. And now I'm like, well, then I was like, damn, now that shit's in my way, motherfucker. Right. So I started, I mean, like I listened to podcasts, right? Not a ton, but some. And I happened to run across a climbing podcast where they had one episode talking about the fear of falling and how to deal with it. And the guest, I'll put the link. She has written a book about the psychology of climbing. She is a psychologist, like that's her training, but she's also a climber. And I sent it to you, and you listened to it, right? And it brought us a lot of thoughts.
For sure. And there's a ton of overlap with, I mean, like all aspects of our life, really. It's just super important. Like what I find that's cool about focusing our attention in a particular area is that they sort of illuminate some things that are present in all areas, but they're more accessible given the space that we're trying to explore, right? So like the things that make sense when you apply them back or retroactively to other things that you do, or you might not see them there, but then this experience in climbing makes it obvious, and then all of a sudden you have to you backfill. And so that certainly happened, I think, with this podcast. She shared a lot of insights that were applicable to fencing, and lots of other things. So
yeah, for sure. And she broke down she broke down fear of falling into a series of much more specific fears, right? Because everyone's fear that they will say generally, I'm afraid to fall, right? It is can be narrowed down. And so like and as she narrowed it down, it made me think of in Duarte's Book of Horsemanship, he talks about the reasons that jousters miss their target. And he again breaks that down into some very similar ideas. It made me start thinking about like concerns fencers have or wrestlers have. I mean, heck, it's related to the conversation you and I had before we got on here, right? Of like, I'm not worried about wrestling. I'm worried about this specific partner and what this specific partner might do to me, or any partner might do to me. You know what I mean? But we'll generalize that out. And so she's suggesting that when we run into these mental hurdles with regards to whatever, craft or art we're pursuing, that we should think about narrow that down, and really get specific about it, because then you know what to do about it. So, I mean, I guess I'll just read out like what she said, fear of falling.
I mean, yeah, for sure.
Don't you think? Right? So the first thing is like the fear of the sensation of falling, right? And I'm going to say, yes, I have that. I don't experience it really like being thrown. Doesn't like when a human throws me. I don't really feel that. But like even the downswing on like a jungle gym swing, I hate the down part.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
I hate that feeling. Like
You
the
hate
summit come up. Oh, bleh,
Yeah.
right.
Because I like that's one of my favorite things. Right.
A lot of people love that feeling. I like the up, but I hate the down. Right. And of course, coming down on a rope, if it has any sort of whip, right? If it has any sort of like swing out and come back to the wall, is exactly that feeling.
Yeah.
So anyway, so fear of the sensation of falling, fear of being out of control physically or emotionally.
Right. I was thinking of that when you mentioned that you felt more comfortable being thrown. Right. Is there some part of that you've trained, that you're experienced, and that you know that you can rely on yourself to manage your fall?
Yeah. I mean, I really think so. Right.
Right.
And so like part of what I started to do, as I began to like explore how I could work past this little block I was encountering, which I've done over the past 4 weeks, is to think about how can I control more of the fall? Like, where do my hands go? Okay, my hands always go here. Where do my feet go? My feet always go here. Right. Yeah. And just like we've talked, well, I don't know that you and I have talked about, but if you've ever taken a wrestling class with me where I discuss falling practice, my firm belief is the only purpose of falling practice is to make you not scared of falling. And it's literally because you know where your limbs go, right? Yeah, like a lot of people think it's not spreading out the force, or it's esoteric, or it's
not meant to be this mysticism. It's really just the way that you get better at things is you experience them a bunch, and then you start to see greater levels of detail, and then you're able to control things that happen with them. Honestly, you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of watching no gear fencing versus doing no gear fencing, right? So like I do lots of no gear fencing, and I'm perfectly safe, right? I'm perfectly in control, and most people, like I don't know, I don't think I've ever really fenced with someone that I like at this point in my practice. I don't think that I would be unwilling to fence with anyone no gear. Like honestly, like I don't think there's a single person that I wouldn't be willing to say, if someone said, "Hey, you want to do some no gear fencing?" that I wouldn't be like, yeah, sure, let's have a few passes. Now, maybe throughout the exchange, I might realize that things are happening in a way that I can't manage. But certainly the first few exchanges, I feel very, very comfortable and confident. And it's interesting because you watch other people do that, right? And you're like, right?
Yes.
But you have to remember, or at least I had to force myself to remember a few times over the last few experiences I had with this. Like, they're in control of what's like. I don't have to worry because they're also humans that are managing things, right? And like they, generally speaking, aren't going to put themselves in situations that are super dangerous, right? And just
for the most part.
I don't mean that you should just treat no gear fencing like you treat any old kind of fencing. I just,
Right.
like if we stand, anyway, sorry. The bottom line is, right, you experience things enough, you get a sense of what it takes to manage them. And then all of a sudden they're not any more dangerous than anything else.
Yeah.
And so if you fall enough times, you fall some 1,000 times, even if you never learned anything about, or even if you never were transmitted any knowledge about falling, right?
Oh yeah.
You're just going to learn how to fall, right?
Yeah.
Now, hopefully you don't put your body through a bunch of torture before you get there, right? So like that's the purpose of tradition in this case, is to say, like, here's how you can introduce falling into your life in a way that's not going to like leave you injured so that you can't continue doing this.
Right. Exactly. Like I can picture a fencer. He's not around anymore, but back in the day, like when we would wrestle, like he didn't have any formal wrestling training, but he'd been doing HEMA, right? And so like his, falling practice involved like just ragdolling, like in a ridiculous, ugly, crazy sort of way. And we laughed about it, and he was like, I know it's ridiculous, but like, this works for me. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, he was fine. So yeah, so practice lets you develop a sense of control physically and emotionally over this uncontrolled situation, right? I think is what we're getting at. And so that's, absolutely one way to overcome that specific fear. She said, fear of fear itself. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Not my problem. I'm not afraid of being afraid.
Sure.
But I can certainly see people who are maybe raised in situations where they learned that to be afraid was dangerous,
Mm-hmm.
and so therefore had developed a fear of being afraid. Yeah. I don't know. I thought that was just a fascinating idea.
Yeah, for sure. So there were a few things. I'm going through my notes here.
Right.
So there was a couple of things. So actually my first note is hanging out in the discomfort, right? So like that's relevant to what we've just been talking about, right? Like, so there is, you're introducing this stuff into what you have access to, right? So like this is weird. I don't feel like I have control. I don't understand it. It's new. It's making me uncomfortable. And just being in that place for longer will make it so you can start ordering this stuff, right? So like, but then, she talked about being mindfully in the moment. I thought, like, I was so happy when she mentioned that, right? Like being mindfully in the moment. There's no room for anxious thoughts.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And so like when you're, and again, you have to experience those anxious thoughts, right? So it's not to say like, if you're fencing and you feel anxious or you feel nervous or you feel like things are going to happen outside of your control, or you're just amped up, you want to win or whatever, wherever your head is, right? Like, it's not to say that you're bad if you experience those things. The truth is, you have to experience all of those things, right? Like, as a human, you have to go through that process. Um, that being said, it's like, in order to be better equipped to do the thing, you have to shed those things. You have to work through them so that you can get over them, so that you can not have them in your practice.
Right. Well, and that circles back around to, like, as I mentioned, Duarte talks about this with jousters, right? And his first thing is that people miss because they didn't want to be there in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is what you're talking about, right? Like I don't even want to be feeling this discomfort. I don't like what's happening.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I need
Right.
to get out, you know?
Yeah. And like allowing yourself to get hit, or allowing yourself to lose, um, or fail or whatever. Right. So like, you want to allow yourself to do that so that you can experience it, so that you can stop putting that on this sort of pedestal, so that you can start to use that energy towards actually engaging in the practice, right?
Right. Yeah. And I mean,
And so
yeah.
she talked about, like, ma getting past this idea that the place of primary importance is the achievement of the goal
Right.
versus the development of self, or the pursuit of mastery.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like the goal isn't get to the top, but how you maybe were moving.
Right, right, exactly. And then just be allowing yourself to, and this is all the same stuff, right? So like, that was what was the coolest to me, was that she was just using this distinct framework and language to describe all the same things that we're constantly harping on about in this.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think now is a good time to talk about that she pointed out that complex tasks, which climbing is, which fencing is,
Uh-huh.
which many things in our lives are, um, you cannot do well if you are tense and anxious and holding all of that concern,
Hmm.
because all of that concern is eating up so much bandwidth that your ability to do this complex task is just going to be you just don't have it. You don't have the bandwidth.
Right, right. So we use the analogy of like, well, so like, if we think about, she talked about racing, right? For me, what's most relevant in my experience today is like lifting, right? Because my Karen and my wife and my son are both actually three three
All
of
y'all.
the people, right? So like, they're doing some, my Karen and Tommy are going to be doing a powerlifting competition next weekend, right? Yeah. And then Ethan, who's my oldest, he's like an actual competitive power lifter.
Right.
Sort of, that's how he culturally identifies. And he's going to be, he's always doing stuff. But anyway,
Yeah.
like, that is what is powerlifting, right? It's a unilateral movement pattern, essentially, or a bilateral movement pattern, right? That, like, super simple, super simple task, right? So like, is it appropriate in
Yeah.
that case to like smack them on the back as hard as you can, and like have them sniff a bunch of ammonia or whatever, and like
Right.
water, like total, like enter a state of like
Get
total
hyped.
yeah, total arousal, right? So total arousal of the nervous system, right? Yeah, that's how you do that, right?
Right. Right.
But that's not necessarily the way that we ought to approach like competing in a title match mixed martial arts contest,
Right.
right?
Right.
And like, we know that, right? We know that because when we watch UFC or whatever, and the fighters come in, they're like relaxed, and their coaches are like gently like
Rubbing their backs.
and like, and they're breathing deep breaths, right? Like,
Yeah.
we know that that's what's successful in those environments. And yet, often in our practice, right, we take a different approach, right? Like it's not unheard of for someone who's getting ready for a fencing match, or to have, or for their coach, or for them to like yeah, start getting their blood running, and like, wow.
Right. Right. Well, I know that there is this idea. I haven't done enough research to know if it's real or not. But there is this idea of burning off adrenaline, right? That the adrenaline has come on, and that it can seize you up. And so if you can hype, you can burn some of it off, and then you're going to be capable of going out and doing your best work.
Right. So I think, I honestly, just to be clear, I think that's probably charitable to most cases. Like, I think,
Okay.
I'm not sure that
Well, okay. So if people don't, yeah, I mean, if people don't have that in their mind, what are they emulating? They have learned this idea somewhere.
Right, for sure. So it may be at the root, or it may be a way to justify behavior that existed before, or something. But whatever, in whatever case, like that, that could be an intellectualization of a process.
Sure. But yeah, so what this climbing psychologist suggested instead was like to have some sort of calming practice, right? That there is another way to deal with the negative effects of adrenaline other than trying to like get into the adrenaline space. The other way is to be like, okay, like she suggested breathing practices, perhaps meditative practice if it's your jam, though she did a big acknowledgement that's not everyone's jam, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Right. But like definitely breathing. And so this is something my climbing partners and I have brought into our practice, like after we listen to this, because of course I send it to everybody and whatever. And like we call it horse breathing, right? Because it's when you exhale with like yeah. Because all of these things are tied, right? Like if you can make your lips loose, other parts of you will loosen, right?
Yeah.
And for the people in our audience who have given birth or who might give birth, right? Like one of the great midwives says, you can't give birth with your face, right? So like doing all of this crazy, holding all this tension in your face, just puts tension everywhere else, right?
Right.
So let it go. So that's like a way we've been doing it on the wall, right?
Yeah. All right. So another thing that she said to do on the wall that I thought was so cool and so interesting was, she was talking about like grounding yourself, right? Like, so pushing down into the wall with your feet, right? And it wasn't just like, so there is that as a matter of like weight distribution or technical efficiency or whatever, right?
Yeah, sure.
That's not what she was talking about in this context. She was saying like, you do it so that you can feel secure, so that you can begin to relax things.
Yes.
Right? And I thought that was so cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm making spurious connections, but we allow that in this podcast.
Oh yeah, we're not.
Okay, just to be clear. But like, so like the other thing that I'll find, and this is in my body, but I think a lot of bodies have this, is that when you get nervous, you start to like get on your tippy toes, right? You like tense up your calf and you get all this tension up in there, right? Like even if you don't actively get on your toes, you get on your toes, right? And so like this is something I do on a climbing wall, and like your little calf just gives out, right? Like it gets exhausted from like you trying to point your toe into the wall. It's almost like an urge to grip, but with your toes. You know what I mean? And it's not helpful. And
No,
so like relaxing into the wall in that way, very like writing. Like what happens when I get nervous writing? I point my toe real hard.
yeah, which does what? Which is a signal to the horse that because your weight is now pushing the horse forward, right? Is we're going to go. We need to go more energy, right? So like, which is exactly the opposite of what you want, right? Because you're already freaked out by the amount of energy that there is, right? So it's a vicious cycle.
Right. As well as it puts tension in my whole body. It pulls me out of the saddle. It does, all these other biomechanical things to my whole lower half that are not helpful for any riding, but especially when I'm nervous. Right. So I found that a useful idea over the past 4 weeks as I've been trying to come off of this development of fear to bring it back down. Is also thinking about that, like heels down, like relax into the wall.
And then, and like actively thinking about that headspace as you're doing it, right?
Right now I have to. Yeah.
Well, and I think that probably most of us have to, and not just in terms of climbing, but like I think that there's a lot of value in doing that in your fencing practice. Now, part of we move very fast when we're fencing. We move very fast, especially if we're really interested, especially if our focus is scoring touches, right? We move fast, we move explosively, and we take ourselves out of being present in the moment, particularly with relation to the rhythm of our training partner, right? And so I'm reminded of and we talk about relaxation techniques. So one way that we might incorporate relaxation into the way that we prepare for an exchange that involves a lot of adrenaline or whatever, right? One way we might do that is thinking about the movie Dirty Dancing just popped to mind as we were
nice.
What a great
movie.
Yeah,
same thing. It's all about fear.
It's all about fear. And then like, how did they relax? So like there was the beginning. So they tried to have her do all this stuff and she couldn't do it. And like the first thing that like they were able to manage was just like holding their hands together, like palm to palm, and then just moving the hand. Right?
Yes.
And just learning how to do that. Because that skill is probably the most important skill of all of dancing. You're not going to move your hand faster than I move my hand, and you're not going to drag and make me pull you, right? You're going to be with my hand, and that means you're going to have to be mindful of where my hand is moving, and you're going to have enough bandwidth to be able to follow it without freaking out, right? And so like you do that. Maybe the correct way of approaching fencing is to do that, right? Like if you can get past like the sort of weird cultural stuff around that, right? Like I'm sure it's taboo to like hold the hand of your training partner or your coach or whatever. But like if that's what we need, right?
Right, but is it? I mean, how often do we see like kung fu sticky hands?
Exactly.
What is grip training? Like wrestling, grip fighting practice.
Right.
It is nothing but exactly that, right? I mean, this is a whole tangent I could go into.
Well, right. I mean, it's been too long on this podcast without like being
like a hard sideways
being critical of cultural masculinity in the 21st century in America. Yeah, okay. But no, yeah, right, exactly. No, and what's even funnier is that we all watch those movies, right? So like we all have like this weird like infatuation with that mode of being, but but God forbid we tried to like integrate that into our own lives, because that would like introduce all this sort of weird cultural baggage stuff that we don't want to deal with.
It'd be real hard.
It would. But maybe do it with swords, right? So like maybe something to relax you, to get you in the and moving, but that would also require that we approach fencing way differently. Go ahead.
You know what I want people? You know what I think training halls, James, need to have butter knives, for exactly this training. Because we all do that across a table and discuss what it's going to feel like at dinner after fencing exchange. Like, this is real. Like, maybe have a butter knife, and that's a way you can do this practice. You know?
Well, and then like eventually, like through that, right, start to get rid of. And here's the thing. Here's what it is that it's a skill that needs to be developed just the same way as falling.
Yeah.
Right. The fear of being regarded as some kind of dandy because you're holding the hand of your training partner, right? Is an experience that you have to have so that you can get over it, so that you can incorporate it into your practice, so that you can become better.
Right. Well, and I mean, this was one of her specific fears of falling. One of her specific fears of falling was the fear of being socially judged. Right? If I fall, it means I am. Right? And so it's the same thing here. If I hold your hand, it means I am. Right? And the real thing you got to contend with is it means I am, because everyone has a different meaning. Right? I don't know.
Right. No, I think that's it. Let me look here at my other notes. So, okay. So yeah. So we've discussed some ways that we might integrate some of these ideas into our coaching.
Yeah.
We also should talk about some of the ways that we don't do that, right? Like, so we actively do the opposite, right?
Yeah.
So, so I'm reminded of, well, so like boot camp is a great example, right? Of the way, right? We need to put people in this environment where we admonish their unwillingness or their like giving up, right? Or is it effective to try and push people past their limits, right? That's a very common training paradigm, and we know that there's at least some utility, right? Like, it's not totally ridiculous, but I think it deserves criticism.
It does. And I think, sorry, one moment. I think what occurs to me is that, again, one of the specific fears she lays out is the fear of or lack of trust in one's partner, right? In the climbing, this is going to be your belay partner, right? This is the person on the ground who has the skills to keep you safe, because there is a lot of skill in that side of the job. But in this context, what I immediately thought of is lack of trust in the coach, right? So if I have no trust in my coach, them pushing me will not make me better, right? So this is a relationship thing, right? It is possible. There are instances wherein being pushed is what someone needs. And
but maybe that's something that you have to earn, and maybe it becomes clear when you have, right? So like,
correct, yeah. When you have the right to be to push, right? Because
that person in that person's life.
Yes. Now, I think even without a lack of trust, you can provide invitation.
Right. Back to horsemanship.
Right. I can making it, like, give to you. I mean, you would probably trust me to push you, but assuming we didn't know each other well, I could be like, well, I don't know, James. Like, I feel like maybe if you made choice X instead of choice Y, it would work out better for you. Like, you might think about trying that, and leave all the agency to you. You decide if you do or not. But as we've developed trust, I can say, James, you can see Y is the wrong choice. Why are you doing that? Do X. Come on now. Right?
Right. Mm-hmm. Or yeah. Or maybe not even like you can see why this is wrong, but maybe just like, hey, remember this, right? Do this, do
Sure.
this.
Even take that even further. Yeah.
And
And
then,
there
yeah,
is a sliding scale, right?
right,
There
right,
is a
right.
sliding scale. And the thing is like when you as a coach are given the trust, when you have reached that sliding scale where you're all the way over saying you do X, if X goes wrong, that shit's on you, not on them.
It is, right? But also I feel like, well, yeah, so it becomes its own organic sort of thing, right? So like when you get
Yeah.
there, when you arrive at that relationship, right? It's its own thing. And it's not exactly that it's on you or on them. It's that you really are in it together. And it's like more than just the way that we categorize it intellectually. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
you become this organism.
Mm-hmm. And can I keep going? Because what occurs to me as we're talking about this, that HEMA in particular, amongst the martial arts I have experienced and studied, has a problem with bringing students or novices, however you want to think of it, up to being peers, and then allowing that maybe even that student to surpass you and keep going, and suddenly you're behind them, right? um, Other more established martial arts have rituals to make this happen,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we don't. And so what I have noticed, and I had never had it so clear as we're talking about it now, so I have to say it, is that we build from giving invitation to giving direction, but then it keeps going, right? It's going to keep going to where now you're, as the mentor, as the teacher, as the instructor, suddenly you're going to have to start trusting them to make the right choice,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so HEMA does really good at getting to that peak of the teacher, mentor, whatever, being in control, but not so great at then relinquishing it back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is the path maybe of mastery. I don't know.
Yeah. Right. Right. Well, certainly. So like we were talking about this, I was talking about this with someone else, but we've spent lots of time talking about like the coach. The role of the coach is not to be better, right? The role of the coach is not to be better at the practice. The role of the coach is to be better at seeing deficiencies in the practice of the athlete or of the student or whatever, right? Than they are themselves. That's the
Right.
role. And to be better at programming ways of developing those deficiencies into proficiencies, right? Or competencies or masteries, right?
Yeah.
So the role of the coach is to help the student in their along their path, and they're, so that's why in my fencing school we use a coach student model in drilling, right? Which is to say that there's always a coach. And by the way, um if you've been around for 6 months and your training partner's been around for 3.5 years, when it's your turn to be the coach, then you're the coach, right? And
Yeah.
it's not, and it's not for the training partner to always assume that role in that drilling relationship,
Yeah.
right? Just because they know what you don't, right? Because there's still something that you can do for them where you have agency, right? So
Yeah.
if all I know how to do is give strong or weak signals, like that's it, that's the only thing I can do,
Sure.
then that's what I'm going to do. And my training partner, who's an elite fencer, who's won gold medals at various competitions, is going to get some value from that beyond just
Absolutely.
me along my way, right? I can give them distinct stimulus. And now maybe I can't, right? Maybe that's beyond my level of competency. And maybe that's where the senior student can come say, hey, let me just show you clearly the types of signals that I need for this drill to be effective to me, right? And then you walk them through that process, and maybe it takes 5 minutes, and then you go back to where this new person is a coach. You can always be a coach, even if you don't know a tenth or a fraction of a percent of what the other person knows, because all you have to do as a coach is just give them and make choices about the responses that you're looking for, right?
Yeah.
And you can go through that process, and like maybe it's going to be limited in scope, right? Maybe you can only coach one dimension. Okay,
Right.
you coach that dimension and you do it until the time's up, and then you move training partners, and then you're back to where you have you're positioned differently,
Right.
in the skill.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I was thinking about it differently, but I like where you went with that, and I think there's absolutely a place for there is a place for and a crucial need for the understanding of the purpose of coaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a progression upon your fencing practice, if your goal is to be a well-rounded martial artist, right? I could think about, like, at my judo club back in the day, the one of the I think he had achieved his 2nd degree black belt, right? Which in judo is a big fucking deal,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so he dominated any competition he went to with foot sweeps.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally all he needed to just dominate. Like, that was his jam. That's what he was good at. He understood every aspect of the foot sweep, right? But when it came time that I got paired with him with my measly little green belt or whatever I was at that point, right? He was never allowed to use foot sweeps.
Sure.
Right? And very often he would be limited to, you can only do this one throw that you hate.
Right.
That's all you get to do on her. She can bring anything she's got to the game, right?
Yeah.
So it's another way to do the same thing you're talking about, right?
Right. Well, and exactly, yes. So I just want to I want to distinguish, because you're talking about a game, so you're still even in the terms of the game, you're still providing that person with something that they can use you to develop, right?
Yes, exactly.
But also there's a difference between a game and a coach-student relationship, right? So
Sure.
In a coach-student relationship, the coach commits to the signal that they want to give to the partner, and doesn't try and win it back if the partner isn't like immediately successful, right? And that's so important, right?
That is important, yeah.
Because we need time to recognize the stimulus, and then catalog the correct response, and then perform the correct response. And often that's not that time that we need is not the window of time that we have, right? But we can't develop the rhythm until we've developed the sequence.
Yes.
Right. So we have to we have to go through the process of developing the sequence. So as a coach, it's my responsibility to give you the stimulus, and I don't care that it takes you too long for it to actually work. Right. I need you to go through the process of making it work if I just stop doing anything. And then once you gain such a familiarity of it that you can just do it after being triggered, right? Then we can start developing the rhythm.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I knew I was going to get here. I think I sent this to you this morning. Checking. I did. I said we weren't going to talk about it today, but we absolutely are. Like, the 15th century dance master. Again, I'm going to put a link. I'm making myself notes of all the links I'm going to give y'all, because it's going to be a lot. But one of the things he talks about is memory, is a quality a dancer has to have. And what he means by that is where you understand the dance so deeply, you have it memorized so well, or we would say now internalized, right?
Yep.
That you do not have to actively recall. That's what he does say. You do not have to actively recall the dance any longer.
And
so
more
that
you can drop out and then enter back in, right?
Yes.
Without the beat, right? Like that's
right.
right?
Exactly. That's why, because we have to remember, guys, dancers then were dancing to musicians who had completely different rules about what music was than we have now.
Mm-hmm.
So the musician could on the fly decide the feel of this is wrong. I want to slow it down to be sad now.
Mm-hmm.
And just do that in the middle of the song.
Mm-hmm.
And the dancer had to be able to go, oh, we're sad now.
Right.
And keep doing the dance.
Right. And so that's like being present in that moment, right? So like
yes,
being tethered. And that's the way that we ought to deal with our training partners, right? So like I've done a whole class, several classes on this now at this point, where it's it's workshops that I'll give at various events, but it's like a dance class, right? And we do waltz, right? Like part of it is just waltzing, right? And why do we waltz? Because I don't know, it's fun to waltz, but and actually for all of the reasons that were in what you sent me, which is that like not only do you have to have command over basically you have to be able to use feeling to work in des, right? So there's that, but then also you have to have command over the way and the rate at which you move your body across space, right?
Yes.
And move your body across time, right?
Yes.
And so like it's not good enough that you just step when you're supposed to, but you can't step too far, right? And so like all of these, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, we have to do a whole nother episode on qualities of a dancer and how they're qualities of a fencer, but that's a different day.
It is a different day. Because that has, go ahead.
Yeah. It has a whole other set of things, but like, there's like one last specific fear in the fear of falling that we haven't talked about, which is the fear of getting injured. Yeah. And I think that one, when I have worked with, because I have worked with fencers who have developed a fear of fencing and who have come to me for help with that. And specifically framed it that way. Like they understood they were afraid to fence now. And fear of getting injured, as well as the fear of being socially judged, are the two biggest ones that I have seen come up with fencers who get fear. And I think this is a really complex fear to deal with, because I think with fencing, most people learn that fear after having been injured.
Right. We haven't developed a culture, or people who fight with swords writ large, right, generally don't do a good job of doing that in a way that precludes injury most of the time.
Right. And I think in part because no matter how much you believe in the real deadly longsword you're doing, you think you're holding a toy.
But that's certainly part of it for sure.
I think that's just culturally real. Because if we understood swords to not be a toy, we wouldn't have to have cutting competitions. Right. Because we would innately understand it don't take much.
Well, right. And even just like beyond that, right? Like, so the swords that we use are 3 pounds and they're steel and they have small tips, right? Like I know people, I spent the last few days with someone who's been stabbed in the throat from front to back with a sword.
A blunt sword.
With a blunt
sword. Through a piece of equipment that failed.
Through a piece of equipment that was designed for that not to happen.
Correct.
Right. So, like,
I mean, yeah. I mean, this is my bugaboo, but for real, I've put a Phillips head screwdriver through my hand.
Right.
A sword does just fine, y'all.
Right. So like now, part of it, I don't know. I've moved so far away from like fencing as a way, well, how do I put it? Like, I don't know. We'll have to save this conversation for next time or another time. Or
yeah.
I've been reconfiguring the role of fencing in the mind of in the mind of a 15th century fencing practitioner, right? Like reconfiguring my sense of what that is. I've been doing that for years and years and years. But I've come so far from, or I've diverged so much from the path that I was on with regards to what these things are supposed to do and what the practice of fencing is supposed to do for us as men at arms in the 15th century or whatever, right? Yeah. And like, I don't really know that I understand where I'm at now, but it's, yeah, I don't know.
We should record a conversation where you develop where you are at now. That would be really fun. But I mean, I'm with you. The shorthand me and my crew use is, martial arts versus solar arts, right? Like, we are using fencing for the purpose of bonding and physical development and friendship and artfulness and right? Maybe not for raping and murdering, right?
Right.
Okay. So like, that's going to be my hard distinction between martial arts and solar arts, right? In the way it was distinct back in the day. But I think the reason why I brought up the idea that swords are toys is, if we are fencing as friends, right? And for these solar ideas that I just threw out, then of course it's a toy. It's blunt. It's flexible. It is intended not to hurt you. So what that then means is, I have to recognize that despite these safety things that have been put in, and despite the fact that this is a toy, I can hurt you really fucking bad with it. Right? It's like the BB gun of, weapons, right? Like, just because it's a BB gun doesn't mean you point it in your friend's face. Like, you still don't do that.
Right. And then, so to come back, so I have two more thoughts that I want to talk with. So we're going to come back to how this particular part of the conversation started, which is that a lot of people come into the practice being told and trusting that they're in a safe environment where they can explore these different movement patterns or this different contextual situation safely without fear of being traumatized. And then they discover that they shouldn't have trusted those people, right?
Correct.
So that's something. And then also, a lot of people come into it, and as a coach, we have a very one-track sense of what it takes to coach somebody, and we feel often as a coach, I'm going to speak for myself, like, I have felt, and I will feel this way, and fuck it up and feel this way later into my practice, right? That I know what this student needs in this moment. And if I can just get them to trust me, just get them to do the thing that I want them to do, push them in the direction I want them to go, that they're going to enhance their experience or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And that's fucking wrong. It's just bad. It's bad coaching. It's not fencing with feeling, right? It's not it's not coaching with feeling, and it's not working in des, right? That as a coach, I have to be sensitive to the various pressure signals that I'm getting from the student that's entrusted me with their development, right?
Right.
And when they play a hard game, I need to recognize it and be soft and yield. And when they play a soft game, it may be the approach for me to be strong in the bind, and guide them. But I always have to be working in des, right? I always have to have the feeling and work in des, so that I don't end up pushing too hard. And like, I need to not be convinced of the righteousness of my path.
Right. Absolutely. And I think this is inherent in what you say, but in case anyone's missing it, or maybe I'm missing it and you can correct me, but when you're talking about a hard game and a soft game, you are talking about swords, but you're also talking about all the other things going on with this human in front of you, right? It's not just, do they want to Durchwechsel, which I would say is a soft game, right? But it's also that they came in with, to use an extreme example, this person walked in with a specific trauma they encountered in their life that caused them to seek martial knowledge, right? They wanted to gain this confidence. So they may be walking in with a bias, hard or soft, mentally, that's related to this whole other thing you don't even get to know about. But you have to know that as a coach. You have to recognize.
You have to be sensitive to it. It is your job to be a good coach. You have to be sensitive to those things. And sometimes it might manifest in, we're doing this technique, and I want you to do this technique, and they keep failing, and you can see that they're getting more and more upset about it. And you think to yourself, oh, well, if you'll just do that, stop. No, maybe the answer is, let's do something different.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Maybe we regress in the process to help you develop skills that will eventually lead you to being at a level where you can perform this thing successfully. Right. Or maybe we just do something totally different that's not even designed for any other purpose than to help instill trust in you of me.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Right. To bring it back to parenting, when you have a toddler losing their mind, sitting there and trying to talk to them about the fact that they're losing their mind will not help. Right. You have to, I call it changing the scene, but like you pick this child up and you're like, and we're going to go do this thing. Right. And you just change everything about the environment, and suddenly it's hard for them to stay attached to whatever this negative experience they're having emotionally is.
Right. Because, and at that level, like, certainly as parents, we're not thinking about it that way. And certainly as toddlers, they're not thinking about it that way. But like, what's essentially happening is we're shifting what we're doing, right? We're shifting what we're doing. I realized that the real skill that you need to develop is not the physical competency of performing this action, but reconciling your fear of failure, or fear of judgment, or reconciling those things. And that might be we play some cards. Like, that might be what you need in this moment. Right. And it seems mystical and it seems woo, but like, it's not. It's actually fucking like really real. And as a coach, now that might be outside of your domain of competency, right? Like, as a coach, you might not be able to do that. And there are a couple of different ways you can approach that. Number one, you can say, I'm going to limit the people that I interact with to people that will thrive in the environment that I put them in. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Right.
Yeah. I know clubs that are like that. Yeah, for sure.
I would probably say you're unnecessarily limiting your practice, or unnecessarily limiting your own development, right? Like, not allowing yourself to learn how to coach more people and a wider breadth of people. Right. But that's not, I'm not here to judge. Right. Another way that you can do it is learn how to deal with people.
Yeah. Right? I mean, absolutely. Just so. And like, related to all of this, she talked about in that falling the psychologist talking about falling. And she said that some people recommend falling practice, right? You're afraid of doing it, just do it. Just do it, just do it, just do it. But she said, if you're just doing it, when every time you do it, you get more scared of it, all you're doing is creating a stronger feedback loop for fear of it. Mm-hmm. That it's only helpful to practice this new experience when you are emotionally experiencing it in a calm, receptive state. And I think this is the exact same thing you're talking about here, you know. And Lord knows, as a parent, like I think I do all right coaching people because I'm very specific about being non-reactive in my own self. But Lord knows, when we're talking about my children or my other very close loved ones, I absolutely get lost in my own head. And I'm like, why don't you can't you just clean your room? I mean, right now, there's nothing else. Like, I don't care what you're feeling. Go, you know.
Right.
And that's not the right choice.
Right. And let's, you know, we're human. So it's okay to not be the best at everything that we do all the time. Right? You don't have to. You don't have to you don't have to quit, right? You don't have to quit being a coach or a parent just because you suck at it, right? No, you just get better at it like everything else.
Better at it. That's exactly right. Well, heck, that's a great thing to end on. You don't have to quit, just get better at it.
Yeah. And there's no time scale. That's the important thing. Right?
It's true.
You just work until you start to fucking degenerate as a human, right? Which happens.
And then you work with that.
And then you work within those, you know, parameters or whatever, right?
Yeah. You know, you just get injured something new every week, and then you work within that.
Okay. It was good to see you.
It was good to see you too. Hey, y'all. I hope you enjoyed our chat.